There are very few women that were born in Cuba that have been considered important artists so far. I find that Nela's work was very bold, very forward, and that she will be ending up being a very significant figure in the art world. Nela was born in Cuba in the year 1915, and from a very young age, she showed interest in art. She took lessons with Armando Maribona, who happened to be a very well-known artist in Cuba, and she also took classes in school. She showed a very advanced talent for art from a very early age, and she kept journals from when she was in school in Inmaculada. When she was in Cuba, Machado was in power, and young people were very rebellious, and there were bullets flying everywhere in different parts of Havana. And one day, a young man who was her suitor was in her house, and Nela would play the piano, and she went to go to the window, and this young man, he pulled her back from the window, and at that moment, a bullet hit him on the chest. He fell back, and his blood spattered on the piano, and he died. And Nela never played the piano again.
Vivió una parte de la historia de Cuba muy fuerte de los años 30, 40, en diferentes épocas históricas. Su vida abarca 100 años, de 1915 a 2015. Vivió una parte de la historia de Estados Unidos de los años 40, 50, muy fuerte también. Después estuvo viviendo en Europa en una época interesantísima, los años 60, 70, y en España cuando estaba el final del franquismo. Después regresó a Estados Unidos en una época también, años 80, 90. Todas esas diferentes épocas históricas fueron muy importantes. Pero además, en todo ese tiempo estaban ocurriendo contextos artísticos en el que ella estaba creciendo como artista.
She ended up in America because she met her husband on a ferry. She had been to the United States because she was looking for schools, art schools with her mom in New York. She was looking at Traphagen. She was looking at different ways to further her art career. On the way home, she met her husband, Willis Hesser Bird, who was a widower, and they got married 2 weeks later. And she came back to the United States with her new husband, who was actually a member of the OSS. But when the war broke out and they had already had their first child, he was sent away to the China-Burma-India theater. And once the war ended, he wanted her to join him in Thailand, but she decided that she was better off staying in the United States, and she continued to study art here. She went to Traphagen. She also went to the New York Student Arts League. She used to study with Leo Lentelli, who is best known for his friezes on the Rockefeller Center. One day, she went to an exhibition by Hans Hofmann, and she was blown away. And she knew that she wanted to be an abstract expressionist for the rest of her life.
My mother surrounded herself with very interesting people when she was in Provincetown. It was the 50s, and she was surrounded by people like Franz Klein, Jackson Pollock, Hans Hofmann, her Motherwell. So she was able to exchange ideas and just live in that same environment.
She was showing in the Provincetown Gallery, and some young woman came in and painted in white the words "so" and a question mark in one of her paintings, and she defaced her painting. It was a scandal of sorts. The newspapers wrote about it. They asked Hans Hofmann what he thought, and Hofmann said, a very nice painting has been made even better by the passion that this young woman has shown. She was interviewed later on in life, and she said that's one of the things that prompted her to leave the United States. Alan and Nela met one day when he was on vacation from Harvard as a junior. He decided to go to Provincetown for the weekend, and he saw her from far away. She was hanging around with her friends on the streets, and they were dancing and they were laughing. And he came up to her and he asked her to dance. She was 21 years older than him. She was always described as being very tall, very elegant, very thin, with bewitching eyes. He said that was it for him, that he knew he was in love for the rest of his life.
She just slid through my arms like a leopard, or ate my heart. I was also enchanted by her painterly artistic vision. Didn't know anything about abstract expressionism. She took me to see all that. That was very exciting, but more than the actual painters and paintings, it was this perception, this different way of looking at the world, and this sort of very pure, intuitive approach. Her spirituality was amazing and wonderful. We were together, the most wonderful years were 7 years in Madrid. 1 year in Barcelona and about 7 in Madrid after we got married. And we lived in Brussels for a year or two. And then we decided to go back to the States. I was working in Manhattan at the UN, and so I'd be 5 or 6 hours in the city every day, and I come back late and I leave early. It's not the best thing, And our life did become more and more difficult. It can be very deep romance with an older woman. I mean, people think the other way around, but it's not simple, the relation between the sexes. It's complex and beautiful. Because there was rather much more of a kind of polarity, a tension between the two. But with Nela, a fusion of the spiritual and the passionate. Too bad that life can't be just frozen like a crystal at a given moment and forever joy, but that's not the way we live, unfortunately.
Their love was a great one. They were a great influence on each other. She moved to New York to an apartment, and I moved separately from her. Their marriage fell apart. She had a terrible car accident in 1993 and couldn't paint anymore because her left arm became mangled. Even though she was a righty, she used her entire body to paint, and that didn't allow her to go back to doing what she loved.
Years passed. I wrote to her. I thought, I've got to get in touch with Nela again. And I couldn't bear the idea of her dying without talking. And I must say, trying not to be too emotional, her answer, I wrote to her with love, and she answered so beautifully right away. So those 3 or 4 years, we exchanged a few letters, and it was wonderful, and I'm so happy about that.
On July 17th of 2015, she passed away. She was about 6 weeks away from being 100. I think Nela kept every single work of art that she thought would be important to document her path later on in life. I don't think she ever parted with anything that was meaningful to her. Her daughter was overwhelmed with all the artwork, and she asked Marcelo to come to her home, and they found an incredible amount of artwork in a very small 2-bedroom condominium.
Cuando llegué allí, me recibe, abre la puerta y lo primero que veo es una imagen enorme de la pintura del ángel, lo cual enseguida me llenó de alegría y me hizo pasar. Empecé a caminar por la casa que estaba llena de obras, todas las paredes, todo el espacio, había pintura por todos lados. Me enseña el garaje, y el garaje eran cajas, pinturas y óleos y todo amontonado. Me enseña otro cuarto en donde había pinturas pero listas para pintar, incluso con el caballete montado. Eso fue la experiencia más importante, creo que, de mi vida. Pusimos todo esto junto en un espacio acondicionado para poder trabajar, comenzar la restauración, cosa que estamos haciendo, restaurando, catalogando, archivando y revisando todos los documentos. Aquí tenemos la primera época de Nela como expresionista abstracta en la escuela de Hans Hofmann, sus primeros sketches y dibujos. Aquí tenemos dos grandes piezas de la época expresionista abstracta y geométrica finales de los 50 en New York, 1958, 59. La característica de esta pieza es que, según por datos propios de Nela, tiene brochazos y colaboración con Karel Appel, que le gustaba muchísimo visitar a Nela en su estudio por la forma en que ella cuidaba sus pinceles y sus pinturas. Aquí seguimos con algunas piezas que corresponden a New York y automáticamente pasamos a esta época que ya es en Ibiza, en donde ella trata de romper definitivamente con el cordón umbilical que la mantenía con su maestro Hans Hofmann y el expresionismo abstracto. Aquí es donde vemos todo ese cambio en cuanto al color, paleta, formato y materia. Algo de figuración, pero siempre manteniendo un carácter muy propio. Son piezas del año 60, 61, 62, 63 aproximadamente.
Oh, I think my mother would be really happy that her work is being restored and taken care of. Just for the last years of her life, I kept on saying, Mother, we have to do something with all this art. Let me start figuring out what to do. And she wouldn't let me do anything. And she'd finally say, don't worry, something will happen.
Nela certainly didn't set out to paint some kind of angel. Out of this void, this emptiness in her intentions, in her head, this creature appears. It's quite wonderful, I think. This one, Wallace Sting, who was associated with Cobra, because they would visit her studio sometimes, people like Wallace Sting and apparently and other painters. And this is Ting, who put this element, and this is obviously Nela. It's a really typical image for her, this sort of oval. And that is like a Chinese character of Ting. That's kind of fun like that. Anyway, and this, of course, a work by Ting. Well, but here we come to the really wonderful works.
My old friend, how have you been?
Well, Crazy as usual.
Yeah, I know. So I met Nela when I was 23, 24, introduced by Alain. I was editor of the Chicago Review at that time. He sent me some pictures and I saw, and I said, oh, she's really wonderful. I remember when I first saw her work, I was struck immediately. I mean, it was unlike anything that I had seen before. The originality of it was startling to me. You know, I was running a magazine of new fiction and new poetry, and so I was used to seeing avant-garde work and things that were basically ahead of its time. But in terms of painting, I had never seen anything like it. The shapes were extraordinary. As a colorist, the juxtaposition of the different colors, the way she mixed the paint, and you were just drawn in. You were drawn into the iconic figures.
She masters all of these different sort of subcategories: abstraction, minimalism, color field, the works, these little dots. That was very unusual to do something like that. But she does it so beautifully. The craftsmanship is really excellent.
She was obviously a very, very gifted painter. The physicality of this work alone is something that most painters would dream of. But she has this ability to handle paint in ways that very few artists do or can or could. This is the last painting that I have in this show that Nela made in 1990. And in 93, she had a car accident and really didn't make paintings after that point. And I think it's very important to see how she was still in a mode that Hans Hofmann had really promoted. I mean, you can see she's painting directly into the wet paint. She's scraping and physically making shapes. And you can see how the blues and the browns actually get mixed. Hans Hofmann was always pressing his students to understand the degree of realness to the physicality of a painting. And I think she probably is the best example of that I've ever seen. And in fact, she probably surpassed the master in some ways.
The way people experience her is just like getting hit very hard immediately with what's happening. And the first question is usually, why have I never heard of this work? Because there's so much of it, because it's so sophisticated, and because it does that special thing of clearly being connected to a lot of other questions around painting in the 20th century American art world and even international art world, especially around abstraction and the medium of paint itself and how it's dealt with. Why I've spent so much time working with this collection is because of the richness of the papers that Nela's left behind. So she kept everything, saved everything, all of the press clippings that had to do with her, all of the correspondence, which is so rich and so great. These are tourist cards that have where Nela's coming from, her biographical information, birth dates, address at the time, birthplace, La Habana, Cuba. She's married. So all of this information is here. And of course, the photograph is a nice thing as well. This is a certificate of nationalization. Again, speaking to that idea that American art really is composed and comprised of people from all over the world. We also see her transnational kind of biography, which goes from Ibiza to New York to Cuba to Miami. And that's kind of amazing. And also just passionate in the very literal sense of the romantic affairs are incredible and amazing. We have a lot of Hans Hofmann's materials in the archives because he taught so many artists in the 20th century, including Nela. So I think making it possible for researchers to find her legacy and how it's so clearly tied to his, and thereby tied to that whole world that he created there in his school in Provincetown, is incredible because, again, it's yet another woman abstractionist who, I think God in the last 20 years or so have come to such prominence and dedicated exhibitions. And I hope there's more because Nela should be included in those from now on.
In those days, when you've got powerful men like a Hans Hofmann, these are really macho characters. And they were known for their hard drinking, hard womanizing, hard studio. That was their life. So it was very hard for a woman to break into it.
I think that part of why her story is not visible to us and why we find this treasure trove of someone's entire life without any context around it has a whole lot to do with her being a woman, born at the wrong time, born at a time where art made by women didn't matter, no matter how good you were. Nela's story is the story of immigration. It's the story of many Cuban Americans who went into exile. In her case, I think that her story is exuberant because she also managed to, with great panache, travel around the world and make that exile experience also be very rich. The way that I see Nela's story in the present is, how is it that a young Cuban-American 7-year-old girl anywhere in the world can go to a museum and see a work of art by somebody like Nela and look at it and say, oh, this is somebody that has a similar narrative and history as me. I can imagine myself being an artist in a museum when I see this, rather than just someone who works in a museum or cleans a museum.
Talent isn't given just to a race or to a kind of person or to a skin color. Talent is universal. The ability to take your feelings and put them on a canvas or on a sculpture or on a photograph shouldn't be defined by where you come from. It should be defined by what you express. So I think it's important to be inclusive, and art is not just for one group of people. Art is really for everyone. Nela felt that she was divided between her cultures. She was always torn between what to call herself. She didn't really feel like she was only from Cuba. She didn't feel that she was only an American, or that was she's really just a person that was from Spain. Her parents had been born in Spain, and she had a very thick Spanish accent. She really came to the realization that she came from everything that had influenced her thoughts, her culture, her life, and she was really of the world.
She was genuine to the core. I mean, there was no artifice about Nela. She didn't compromise her views about painting. She didn't want to talk about painting. She didn't want to talk about art. She didn't want to talk about aesthetics. She didn't want to talk about what inspired her or why she was doing it, or she just painted. She was a painter.
Actually, I think Nela was really passionate about her artwork. I think more than anything, she loved her work. She loved painting above everything else. She was never in a hurry to be recognized. She was always, even when she was in Provincetown, her artwork would always say NFS, not for sale. When she exhibited next to Hans Hofmann and next to Klein and next to de Kooning and all of these people that were part of her life. Many of the anecdotes are that people would send her cartoons that said, not for sale, not for sale, not for sale on an artist's show, because she really didn't want to sell. She wanted to keep the lion's share of what she thought was samples of her expression so that the world could see them later and the world could appreciate what her path was.
She was very possessive about it, like her children. Really possessive. I mean, it's true, she sort of wanted to sell her work. I mean, she was very happy when somebody really liked her work, but no, she didn't like to let go of it. But I do understand that.
I believe she believed, though she never quite said it, that people would know her, discover her, after she was gone. And she was happy with that. She was content with that.
My mother really did isolate herself from the world of art in the latter part of her life. She didn't want to deal with the commercial aspects. Every so often I would tell her, Mother, art really is also a business. And she just wouldn't accept that. She just didn't want to accept it.
I think that once scholars study her work, they will be able to understand that she was really influential and that she was ahead of her time in many of the things that she did.
I'm very proud that my mother will be leaving a lot of beauty behind. She evolved and adapted to different art forms. And even though she was influenced by some artists, she made everything her own. She wasn't copying anybody. And art will live on, way after, well, obviously after her, but also after me